It really is brilliant,
Just
isn't
gripping.
it? It's an absolutely brilliant series.
Shocking in every sense.
In 2009, Worboys was convicted of sexual assault against 12 women, though police believe he preyed on more than 100.
Our criminologist David Wilson is with us now, alongside leading human rights solicitor Harriet Wistrich, who represented some of Worboys' victims and successfully sued the Met Police for failing to properly investigate their allegations. Good morning to both of you.
Good morning.
I was just saying, Harriet, that I started watching it yesterday. We get a preview and I couldn't stop watching.
No.
I've seen all of them. It's an extraordinary dramatisation of a horrific ordeal for these women at the hands of John Worboys. You were involved in the case. You were involved in trying to get justice. Take us back to that time for you, what it was like when you first met these women and you first understood what was going on.
Yeah, so I had followed the case in the news. There'd been the trial where he was eventually convicted. Then there was an IPCC investigation into police failures. But and then I was approached by one of the women and subsequently a second woman who had both reported him at the time, but had and they feature in the drama. That's Sarah and Layla, and they basically were saying, look, you know, what he did to me was awful, but actually it was even worse the way I was treated by the police. And what can we do to hold him to account? So that was my initial involvement, and it took many years to pursue a claim against the police. But we did. We had to. You can't sue the police in negligence. It's something many people don't realise, but you know. Failure, people think, well, the obvious thing is negligence, and of course they were negligent, but in law you can't use negligence to sue the police, and that's been established since the case of the so-called Yorkshire Ripper, where the court, the highest court in the land, then the House of Lords, said that wasn't a possibility. So what we were beginning to explore at that point, this was in the early 2000s, was the fairly new Human Rights Act, which incorporates the European Convention on Human Rights. And that provided the route in. So it was a kind of fairly unprecedented legal challenge. I thought the police wouldn't want to fight it because it was such a strong case, in a sense. You know, that the failures, as you see in the programme, are so dreadful that, you know, I just thought they're going to settle this. But they didn't, and we fought it. And in the end, the police, we went to trial, and the trial's portrayed a bit in the drama, and it went all the way up to the Supreme Court before we established a precedent, which is actually a very important precedent, that I work for the legal charity Centre for Women's Justice, which is about holding state institutions accountable for the failures. And so we have that precedent at the moment, and let's hope we keep it, because there are talks about leaving the Convention.
When you say the failures, Harriet, that's what I found the most heartbreaking thing about the whole drama. It was. These women went forward and asked for help, and it was just a catalogue of disasters.
Yes, that's right. And I think one of the things that struck me really working with those women and with many other women who report rape, you can see from the programme how absolutely hard it is to report and go through that criminal justice process. It's really not something you're going to do unless you feel some kind of obligation to do it. Why did those women do it? Because they could see that he was a serious risk. They could see how easily he had, you know, kind of managed to incapacitate them. And they were frightened for other women, rightly frightened. And so they pursued that case. They kept pursuing it because they saw the risks involved, and that is the case for most women who report. I think, as well as individual justice, they see somebody as a danger and they want to stop it.
One of the things that's so compelling is one of the women that comes to you, she's portrayed, doesn't tell her family what she's been through, and when she's sitting and she realises what the police have done and how they've ignored her, for her to say, the one place I thought I could go and I would be safe and listened to and heard. They ignored me. They downplayed what had happened to me. They told me there was no case to answer. They told me there was no drugs in my system, and they lied. Basically, it's an extraordinary drama. David, let's go back in case anybody can't remember John Worboys and actually what he did and how he preyed on these women, and just what an extraordinary sort of case this was.
And Cap introduced us by saying, this is an amazing group of women. It's a real privilege to be sitting next to Harriet Wistrich this morning, who is an amazing woman who's fought hard in our legal system for justice for women. So well done to you, Harriet. John Worboys changes his name to John Radford. He's known to the press as the Black Cab Rapist. He passes the knowledge in 1996, which legally allows him to drive a black cab. It means he's also registered. There's a great deal of trust in black cabs in the City of London. But he's going to use his cab to drug, sexually assault and rape a number of women. Until his arrest in 2008, and perhaps over 100 women would be targeted in this way. Prior to changing his name to John Radford, he's been playing with this persona for many years, hasn't he, Harriet? And prior to, passing the knowledge, he was a male stripper. He stripped under the name Terry the Minder, and we have some photographs of him in that guise. But this guise is one of him being virile, one of being strong, one of being attractive to women. And that's part of the fantasy persona that he produces. And that's, of course, a very risky persona for somebody like Worboys Radford to have had.
And what was his modus operandi?
Yeah.
How did he manage to get these women and then drug these women? And what was the process that he went through to gain their trust?
Well, it was very well refined by the time of his arrest, because he hadn't previously been arrested for earlier crimes that he committed. And so this is a very well-rehearsed modus operandi, which would be he would go to the centre of London, he'd be outside nightclubs, he'd look and see if there was a lone woman who had perhaps been driving. He would effectively pick them up. Drinking, I beg your pardon. He would pick them up and he would say something like, it's your lucky night. I've had a win at the casino or on the lottery. He would sometimes show them a bag of cash to prove that he had had a win at the casino. And then he would say, have a glass of champagne with me to celebrate. Have a glass of champagne as a way of celebrating this win. Obviously, the women, many of these women, did not want to take that glass of champagne, which was drugged with over-the-counter drugs and illegal drugs. So that women didn't want to accept this glass of champagne, but he was incredibly insistent. And one of the things that I think has been really good in the drama is how the women portray, look, we didn't want to take this, but he just went on and on and on, and they felt it would be rude not to.
The other thing he'd done, though, as well, because many of them said, I haven't got any money to get a cab home. He said, I'm going that way anyway, so I'll do you a favour. So he's immediately sort of offered that olive branch of help of getting them home late at night when they've had a few drinks and they haven't got the cash to get home. The security and safety of being in a black cab, Harriet, I think one of the things that is so striking in some of those initial interviews, because he would take the victims back to their places of where they lived afterwards. They kept saying, are you sure it wasn't an illegal cab? Are you sure it wasn't an unlicensed cab? Are you sure it was... Why would he drive you home afterwards and risk his licence? I mean, the police were desperate not for it to be a black cab driver.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that was happening at that time was there was a big campaign by the Mayor of London to say, don't trust unlicensed cabs, get a black cab. Yeah. And you see that in the programme as well, the boyfriend saying to Sarah, look, mate, have you got money for a black cab?
Secret £20 in the
and it's just like that was seen as the safe option, as though, somehow the fact that you've got a licence as opposed to you haven't is a reason why you wouldn't be a rapist. And unfortunately, that isn't the case. And I think, really these women face so many sort of doubts about their account. Obviously they couldn't remember exactly what had happened. And that's why so many women didn't report, because so many women knew something had happened, but they couldn't remember exactly what, weren't sure, and just sort of thought, well, they're not going to believe me. But these women, and there were about 10 women who reported before he was eventually, somebody put 2 and 2 together and realised that this was a remarkably similar modus operandi that he was using, and that actually here's a pattern, and we've had several reports. Why haven't we joined the dots here? So you know, that was really, really important. But you know, they were sceptical about the black cab. They said that to both of the women. They were you know, sceptical about the fact that they hadn't found date rape drugs.
They were looking for retinol. They were looking for specific things.
But it was a cocktail, wasn't it?
He used a cocktail of over-the-counter drugs. Yeah. And you know, and there were these other drugs found in the toxicology. Police never even asked them, did you take these drugs? They just sort of thought, no date rape, right? That's it. That was all they were looking for. Once that wasn't there, dismissed the case.
So he was convicted in 2009, but now he's up for parole again this year.
So he was convicted in 2009 only of offences between 2006 and 2008.
Yeah.
But then in 2018, he was first up for parole, was granted parole. That was then revoked. And in 2019, he was convicted of 4 further offences, which predate some of the offences he was convicted of in 2006, going back to 2001. Now, he's again up for parole on the basis of the conviction of those 4 offences he gets convicted of in 2019. And the parole hearing is in early June of this year. Should he be released into the community again? Is he safe to release? And remember, and we both are fully aware of the parole system, this is about the risk he still poses to women. And can he demonstrate that he is no longer a risk at this time?
What do you think about that, Harriet?
Well, when so the other bit of the story that the drama portrays is the decision that was made back in 2018 by the parole board to release him. Now, when we heard about that, and we were still waiting for the Supreme Court judgment in the case against the police, there was widespread shock. You know, this is a hugely prolific rapist. I mean, over 105 women were known to have reported by the time of that parole board decision, you know, had come forward after the crime had been prosecuted.
And in the original conviction, there was only 12, because I think, didn't the CPS say we don't want to confuse everybody, don't want to confuse the jury by putting 100 cases in there?
Exactly. And so the fact that there'd been only a small number that had been selected, the parole board, and this is what we discovered because we took another legal challenge with the same 2 women against the parole board decision to release him, because you know, everyone was saying this man isn't safe to be released yet. What we discovered was the parole board had only taken into account the offending for which he'd been convicted of, but not into account of the much wider pattern of offending which he was believed to have committed. Yeah. Probably well over 100, because even now...
It's unreported.
Yes.
It's an unreported crime.
It's an unreported crime. And, you know, I wouldn't be at all surprised if more women come forward after this drama.
Yes.
So, look, this is what the Met Police have said with regards to the current situation with parole. Our thoughts remain with the victims and survivors, and we have apologised for the serious failings in the investigation and the distress caused. This case led to significant improvements in the way that rape and sexual offences are investigated. Today, we're working to ensure victims and survivors are at the heart of our response. He is still up for parole again. There was a victim on Good Morning Britain this morning who was speaking incredibly compelling about the threat that she believes he still has. And that would be the concern.
Exactly. In fact, that person had approached me at the time we did the parole board challenge. She, along with a number of other victims, had come forward. So without inviting, but when we were talking about potentially doing a challenge, they said, look, can I help? You know, or I never even reported him, but now I'm willing to do so. Or I reported him, you know, is there anything I can do? And loads of women came forward. That's what, you know, if I had any doubts, which I didn't really, but if I did, that really convinced me that you know, there was such concern for those that had been targeted by those men, as that man, as well as by so many others.
It's an extraordinary drama, and as David said, you and the women did such an extraordinary job. First time round, we want to sort of make sure we can try and help people stay as safe as possible. So thank you for joining us, Harriet. David, great to see you as ever.
Nice seeing you both.
Believe Me continues tonight at 9 o'clock on ITV1 and ITVX. You can catch all the previous episodes on ITVX, of course. If you've been affected by any of the issues that we've been discussing, you can find advice and help at itv.com/helplines.